Africa in general, it's very easy to meet people during the daytime. It's not considered strange to just chat up a stranger and then ask for their number. Now, in Argentina, this, in my experience, is a lot less common. Women in Argentina can be friendly, but they're also very unpredictable and capricious. So they can change their mind in an instant.
Focus, man.
What's happening, everybody? Once again, this is your guy, Jay Focus, reminding you to stay focused. And today, I'm coming to you with a very special topic. We're kicking the year off, right? So if you don't know, for the last 6 months, I've been traveling throughout Africa. To be a little bit more specific, I'm primarily talking about Eastern Africa and a little bit of Southern Africa. Now, the first half of the year, I was traveling in Argentina. So these are vastly different worlds. And because I'm in a unique position that I've spent half the year in Argentina, in Latin America, and then half the year in Africa, I can directly compare them and just let you guys know about some very big differences that I've noticed throughout these travels in these vastly different parts of the world. Now, the very first thing you're going to notice that is a huge difference between Argentina and Africa is that in Argentina, there's only one language, and that language is Spanish, right? So if you speak Spanish in Argentina, you can operate everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere, because in Argentina, the vast majority of the population is monolingual. Just like in America, where everyone speaks English for the most part. Of course, you have immigrants and stuff, but generally it's an English-speaking country. It's the same case in Argentina, except it's a Spanish-speaking country. So most people you're going to meet, they are going to speak the same language in the street, the same language at work, the same language at home. It's Spanish, 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 okay? Now, this is very, very different than African countries. Every single African country that I've been to at least 10 African countries now. They speak more than one language. So you'll have an official language, you'll have a language that people speak at home, maybe a different language that people will, that they'll work in, and then they'll have whatever additional languages that they're fluent or semi-fluent in that they'll use to speak to foreigners, right? So to give you guys an example of how that works, for example, in Kenya, everyone in Kenya speaks Swahili. I don't care who you are in Kenya, you are going to speak Swahili, right? But then on top of that, most people will also speak English because they went to school in English, right? But it's not the same as growing up in England and only knowing English, you know, because this is the only language that you know. It's the language you dream in, the language you speak to everyone in. And that changes the dynamic. Even if your English is really good, if it's not your native, your primary language, it's slightly different. Now, like I said, in Argentina, that's not the case. It's Spanish 100% of the time. Yeah, you might have some tribe somewhere that you're never going to meet who do speak a couple other indigenous languages. But generally, in any of the major cities in Argentina, you can communicate with everyone with only Spanish, and they typically will only know Spanish. So why am I speaking so much about language? Because language really affects the way that you think. It affects your culture and how easy it is to connect with people. Because you can connect with people on one level, but it's another level when you're connecting to them in the language that they speak to their mother in, the language that they have their dreams in, and on and on and on and on. So for me, as far as having one simple standard language, Argentina wins. Hit that like button. I'm putting in work out here. I swear to y'all, I'm putting in work. And just stay tuned. Now, like I said, in Africa, whether you're in Kenya and it's Swahili and it's English and it's whatever other tribal languages they might know and whatever other foreign languages they might know. That's one thing. You go over to Uganda, they speak their language, the Ugandan language, and they speak English, and then they speak whatever other languages. Whether you're in Madagascar, they speak French, then they also speak Malagasy, which is their real language, and then they speak maybe another regional language. So this is the pattern that I notice all throughout Africa. Moving away from language, I'm going to talk about prices. So everyone wants to hear about this. The cost of living is cheaper in Argentina than any country that I've been to in Africa. Like I said, at this point, I've been to 10 African countries. I'm going to go ahead and list them just for you guys to know. That's not cap. So I've been to Morocco, I've been to Egypt, I've been to Madagascar, I've been to Mauritius, I've been to Burundi, I've been to Uganda, I've been to Kenya, I've been to Rwanda, and I've been to Namibia. I think I said, in Ethiopia. So I think that's 10. I think I said all 10. If I didn't, correct me, let me know, and I'll clarify down below. So none of those countries is as cheap as Argentina is. Argentina, the value for money there is amazing. I think it's got to be in the top 3 in the world, at least as of right now. Things could change drastically in the next couple of months with their new administration, but for now, it is one of the best deals on planet Earth for what you're getting. So to put these in number terms, you could spend a month in Argentina, do a little bit of traveling, a little bit of tourist type things, have a nice Airbnb in a central part of the city, and eat out quite often, almost every day. Get a lot of value and activities for your money. Go out to a gym, etc., for around $1,200 a month. And of course, you could do it much cheaper. You could do it much higher, right? But I'm talking about medium level American Western type lifestyle. You can live that way in Buenos Aires or other Argentinian cities for about $1,200 a month as a tourist. Now, obviously, as a local, you can do much, much better. But this is specifically about the tourist experience, right? Now, converse that with Africa. Obviously, I'm not talking about one African country. I'm talking about the various countries that I've been to. But for the sake of this, we're talking about Rwanda. We're talking about Kenya. We're talking about Uganda. We're talking about Mauritius, Madagascar, and Namibia, right? So out of these countries, there's no way you're going to live close to that same kind of lifestyle for $1,200 as a tourist, right? I would say to be safe, you would calculate about $2,000 a month. Now, all of those countries I mentioned in Africa, the prices vary quite a bit. I would say Kenya is the best value for money that I've seen in Africa. And there you could do it for a lot cheaper than $2,000, but $2,000 encompasses all of the countries, just to give you guys a round figure, right? The $1,200 a month figure for Argentina lifestyle translates to at least $2,000 a month in Africa as a tourist. Now we have to speak about the weather, because a lot of people want to know about this when they travel. Well, if you don't know, Argentina is in Latin America, but Argentina has seasons, right? Seasons, if you guys know what seasons are, I'm sure you do, right? So if you think you're going to escape New York, you're going to escape Baltimore, wherever else in the States that has seasons, and you're going to go to Argentina and it's going to be hot and tropical like Colombia, like Medellin every day, it's not, right? So most of Argentina, most of the places that a tourist is going to go to, places like Mendoza, places like Cordoba, places like Buenos Aires, the capital, these places have seasons. So if you're going to stay there for months on end, you are going to need a bigger wardrobe. You're going to need layers for when it is wintertime. You can't just show up in shorts, maybe one pair of jeans and short sleeve shirts and think that's going to last you. It's not. Some people love seasons, so that's perfect for them. But I'm just letting you know that the weather in Argentina, it varies. You're going to need heat in the wintertime. You're going to need air conditioning in the summertime. And some people are trying to get away from that, like me. So I'm just letting you guys know that up front. Now, in Africa, in East Africa in particular, it really varies. So if you're in Nairobi, for example, they have seasons as well. The seasons aren't as extreme maybe as they are in Argentina. So it doesn't get quite as cold as it does in Buenos Aires and Nairobi. But don't think you're going to be wearing shorts the entire year there, or even most of the year. You're going to need jeans, you're going to need jackets and layers. That's a little bit less true for a city like Kigali in Rwanda. There, I honestly think you could survive the whole year without heating and even without air conditioning. It's a very mild climate. Now, it does get rain. There is a little bit of a rainy season, but it's not anything crazy, right? It's not like Miami. And Uganda, too, is very comfortable weather year round. So you could wear shorts there the entire year and be cool with that. So that's one nice thing about East Africa that attracts me to it. Now, in the islands like Mauritius and Madagascar, it's tropical, with the exception of the capital of Madagascar, which is Antananarivo. So if you go there, you're going to need layers most of the year. They do have a rainy season. They have a cold season. So it's much more similar to a European weather. It's more similar to the weather that you have in Argentina, where it's just always changing. You always have to have layers. You always have to have an umbrella. I can't even say it. You always have to have an umbrella. So even within East Africa, there is a lot of variety as it relates to the weather and the seasons. Now, I told you guys I would speak about Southern Africa a little bit as well, because I spent over a month there. So in Namibia in particular, you have a very dry climate throughout the country, and in particular in the capital. If you're going to be there, you're going to have shorts and stuff in the summertime, but then in the wintertime, you are going to need heating. So basically, you're going to need something all year, whether that's air conditioning in the summertime or heating in the wintertime. So you're going to be dependent on something to make the climate livable and comfortable. The next thing I want to talk to you guys about is the attitudes, because let's face it, the attitudes are really important, because you're going to be interacting with people every day, no matter where you go in the world. So in Argentina, I will say the moment that your plane lands, in my experience and most people that I've spoken to, it's a very pleasant experience. People greet you at the airport, especially if you're coming from a Western country. There's not a lot of interrogation. You're not assumed to be up to no good for entering their country. I will say this a million times, that Argentina is one of the most open countries in the world. And I think it doesn't get enough recognition and credit for that. And I have friends from all over the world, from Africa, from Haiti, from pretty much you name it, who have lived in Argentina, and they've told me the exact same thing, that they feel very welcome in the country, and that's what it is, right? So one thing I will say, though, is that especially in the capital, in Buenos Aires, the local people, the porteños, they can be very snobby. And of course, this is not everyone. I don't want to paint the whole country this way. Like I said, this is a certain segment of the population in Buenos Aires, because of course, with it being a large city, you get people who weren't born in Buenos Aires. They come from other provinces in Argentina, and they have a different attitude and a different manner of being generally, right? So another interesting thing about the attitudes in Argentina is that I'm not assumed to be wealthy. So it doesn't matter how I'm dressed. It doesn't matter whether I'm in a suit and tie, which sometimes I do wear a suit and tie, even with the dreadlocks, y'all. I be out there sometimes suited and booted. Sometimes I'm just like this, just super casual, just chilling. I'm just generally not assumed to be a wealthy person. Not that I consider myself wealthy, but I'm just want to get this out there. I think for whatever reason, they don't usually look at black people and assume that they have money. Now, they know I'm not poor, they know I'm not struggling, but I'm not seen as a guy to be like, hit him up, he's got money. So while there are beggars in Argentina, they're pretty much equal opportunity. So yeah, I do get asked for money on occasion from from people on the street, but it's not any more than a local person. So hopefully that makes it a little bit more clear. Now, one difference I've noticed in Africa is that I get hit up for money much, much more than a local person would. And I don't blend in Argentina, and I also don't blend in Africa most of the time. So it's not a thing of, well, you look like the locals, so of course I feel more comfortable asking you for money. It's not the case. It's just I'm perceived to be wealthier than I'm perceived to be in Argentina, for better or worse, right? So at times in different countries, it can be annoying when I'm singled out over other locals or even other tourists to give money. I have people stop me, and it occurs much more frequently in Africa than it does in Argentina. Now, that being said, there is a lot of poverty, a lot of people living on the street in Argentina, but I am not specifically targeted as much as I am in Africa. Now, I will say that in Africa, the attitudes in all the countries I mentioned previously, they vary quite a bit. So in Rwanda, for example, I get stared at a lot when I'm walking down the street. And I don't think this is a particular thing for me just because of my appearance. I've noticed that many other westernized blacks and just people in general have remarked on YouTube or in various anecdotes that they also get stared at a whole lot when they are in Rwanda. I think it's just a cultural thing that if you didn't grow up in Rwanda and they can tell you are not local, that they're going to stare. And, it is what it is. It's harmless. No one's ever taken it further than just staring. But that's something that I actually get stared at more in Rwanda than I do in Argentina, if you guys can believe that. But it's true, right? Now, in some of the other African countries that I've been in, I pretty much blend in as far as not getting stared at, or at least they're much more subtle about it. So in Mauritius, I didn't get stared at, even though most people look nothing like me. It's a majority Indian country. And the same in Madagascar, I didn't get stared at very much, even though I look quite different than most of the locals. I can say the same thing about Kenya. Didn't get so many stares this time. Now, when I had first visited Kenya many, many years ago, I did a previous video and I mentioned I was getting stared at very strongly in Nairobi, but now I haven't had that same experience. Same with Uganda, not much, nowhere near as much as I was getting it in Rwanda. Where else? Namibia? No, nobody really stares at me. I mean, obviously I get called Rasta Man a lot because of the hair, but beyond that, nah. Now, I will say this too. I gotta add this, is I get called Rasta every single freaking day in Africa. It doesn't matter which country I'm in. This is across the board, where in Argentina, it almost never happens. Maybe once a month, there'll be some local Argentinian guy with dreadlocks and he might call me Rasta. But other than that, it just never happens. The local population just doesn't say that to me, especially not randomly on the street. But it doesn't really bother me. It's just weird in the beginning, and it's something I had to get used to while I was traveling in Africa, that, hey, people are going to call you Rasta. They're going to assume that you are a Rastafarian, which I'm actually not. I have nothing against it. I have a lot of respect for Rastas, for the real dudes who, they're really following that culture to the T, but that's not my culture, like I said. So it's kind of awkward when everyone is calling you Rasta, and I'm like, I'm not a Rasta. And typically when they're calling me Rasta, they're assuming that I smoke weed. And that's even more awkward because I'm not trying to buy weed on the street from random people, but I'll leave that for another video. As it pertains to attitudes in Africa, I can say that even places where I don't look exactly like the locals, I feel like they see me as at least a distant cousin, which is a feeling that I don't get in Argentina. Now, I'm not saying that most people in Argentina are looking at me like a bad person, like a criminal, but I don't feel that familiarity. And most people are probably going to say, well, that's obvious. They don't look like you. They don't have your race, which very good points. But I'm just making it that much clear that there is a kind of an unspoken feeling that you get if you are black when you're in Africa, that it's just incomparable to any other place in the world, unless it's another majority black nation, like maybe Barbados or something like that. But even in DR, I don't even feel the same kind of feeling that I feel in Africa. As it pertains to visas between Argentina and African countries. This is going to be very short as it pertains to Argentina because there are no visas. If you're coming from a Western country, UK, Canada, US, Australia, anything similar, you don't even have to think about visas. You can show up and you're given 90 days on arrival, and even that can be easily extended. And even if you overstay on accident, wink, wink, they have a more or less liberal policy where you'll pay a fine and that's pretty much it. You can come back again. Just don't do it repeatedly because then, yeah, it could become a problem, right? Now, East Africa and even Southern Africa is a little bit different, which is shocking to me because I travel on a Western passport. You know, that's what I was born with. And I look more or less like those people in Africa. You know, I'm obviously a black person, but I don't feel that same ease and access to travel in Africa like I do in Argentina. Now, I'll give you guys some specific examples. So it also varies too, because obviously these countries are not uniform. In Uganda, for example, you cannot just land in Kampala and Entebbe airport as an American, as many different Western countries, and just go about your business. No, you have to pre-plan it. You have to get a visa in advance, which is an e-visa. You have to fill out forms. You have to tell them exactly I'm staying here until this time. You have to show a yellow fever card. There's many, many steps that go into it. And then on top of that, you have to pay money. Now, I'm not opposed to paying money for a visa for countries that are developing. I understand that they need hard currency from the outside. That's not the part that annoys me. It's the whole process. I don't like that we have to go through this whole visa process, which is complicated, especially if you're traveling in a group. Now, I'm typically not traveling in big groups, so I generally only have to think about myself. But I can understand for families who have to have the burden of getting a visa, getting all these documents together, it can be a bit overwhelming. Compared to places like I mentioned, like Argentina, like Mexico, where you just show up and that's it, right? Kenya is more or less the same. You have to go through a process where you have to submit all these documents, and then on arrival, you have to show them something. And, it's a lot more complicated. It's something additional where you can't just sit back in your airplane seat and just land and, stamp my passport and keep it moving. Right. Madagascar, same deal. You have to pay on arrival. Mauritius, you don't actually have to pay when you land in Mauritius, but these people are extremely rude. The people that work in immigration, and especially if you're black, it doesn't matter if you have a Western passport. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. If you're black, you're automatically assumed to be some kind of a criminal or someone who's going to overstay their visa, which really boggles my mind. And is nowhere near the treatment that I got in Argentina, which is a majority white nation. So, there you have it. Like I said, Africa varies greatly. And I was mainly speaking about East Africa, Rwanda. You can, on arrival, get a visa, and you just pay. You don't have to submit so many documents, and you're not being interrogated as much as some other countries. Burundi, you do have to organize everything in advance. You have to get a visa, and it's a process, right? Now, in Southern Africa, in Namibia in particular, you do not need to show anything when you land, but you will be interrogated, and they kind of don't want to give you the 90 days on arrival. They want to know specifically how long you're going to be here and what day you're leaving. So, like I said, I didn't feel as welcome visa-wise, immigration-wise in Africa as I do in Argentina. And I know that's probably surprising to people because Argentina has this reputation of being so racist and so anti-black. But me being a black man, every time I've gone to Argentina, I've been treated the same. That's my spiel on visas in Africa. And like I said, some countries in Africa do require you to have a yellow fever vaccination and a certificate, and some will actually check. Now, you might get lucky and they may not check, but Kenya, Burundi, and Uganda, and perhaps Tanzania are the ones that are most likely to check but it varies. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. So you want to have that in mind when you're traveling in Africa. Just go ahead, have your yellow fever ready to go. So it's one less thing to think about when you're arriving. Now, this is the part that everybody wants to hear about. Y'all want to hear about the ladies. Y'all want to hear about the women. What the women talking about, what the women saying out there, right? So I already did a video about Argentinian women, but I feel like I can always say more and people have more questions that they want to ask me. So I'll say generally, women in Argentina can be friendly, but they're also very unpredictable and capricious. So they can change their mind in an instant. One minute, they're all about it. Next minute, the wind blew and they're feeling completely different. And that's just the nature of many Argentinian women, specifically in the capital, but it's kind of across the board all over the country. Many people who travel to Argentina say they're complicated. That would be a good way to describe the average Argentinian woman. Many Argentinian women are feminist. This should not be a shocker if you've done any research on the history of Argentina and Eva Perón and on and on and on. I'm not going to bore you guys with that, but just know that it's a very feminist country and that's what you're going to be dealing with, right? When you're dealing with Argentinian women. Argentinian women also are very vocal. They like to talk a lot. And for some people, that's a bonus. They really like to engage. They like to have those deep conversations. And for other people, that's a negative. So I'm just putting it all out there and you interpret that as you will because we're all different. Contrast that with African women. In general, of course, I haven't dated every African woman, every African country. I'm talking about the ones that I've been to. Stay with me, guys. So in general, African women are much more easygoing and laid back than Argentinian women. Most African women that I've dealt with have been more agreeable. They tend to be a little bit more soft-spoken in general. Very, very respectful. On average, I would say that they are less talkative than Argentinian women. Now, I'm not going to say that African women will not get their point across. They will. I'm not going to say African women are unintelligent. I've ran into some very intelligent African women, but they tend to speak with a purpose. They're usually not just talking to talk. And of course, this varies. So in Kenya, you're going to have the most westernized women in the parts of Africa that I've traveled to. And they are going to be a little bit more vocal. But even them, in my experience, they're not going to be as loquacious as an Argentinian woman. Argentinian women tend to talk a lot. And for some people that's engaging, it keeps them from getting bored and on and on. And some other people, it can be tiresome. And of course, like I said, I'm not talking about every Argentinian woman because they vary. It's a big country and I want to say that one more time, but I'm talking about broadly. These are general things, so don't be offended. And I don't know. I don't know what you can do, but just don't take this so personally. When it comes to dating between Argentina and Africa, what I've noticed is that in Argentina, it is easier to meet women on apps. So in some countries, there's kind of a stigma to meeting girls on apps where it's kind of like, oh, well, those are just the leftover girls, or, if they were a high quality, beautiful woman, why would she need to be on an app? Blah, blah, blah. That's the perception in certain countries and certain cultures. Now in Argentina, I didn't really find that to be the case. I feel like everybody and their mama is on the dating apps. So this is from the lowest classes to the highest classes, to the most beautiful, desirable women, to the least desirable women. Everyone is on the apps. I feel like that is a very common way for people to meet in Argentina, as opposed to maybe some other countries. Speaking more about dating in Argentina, the social circle culture is very big. So beyond the dating apps, if you meet somebody, everyone tends to go out in very, very big groups. If you're in a nightclub and you meet a girl, she's almost never just with one or two people. She's usually there with like 7 people. And sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming to deal with all of that, all the personalities, all of the energy, and it's completely different. When they go out to dinner, it's often, like I said, in very huge groups like that. And this is unique to their culture. It's even more so than in the American culture. It's just a very big social circle type of a culture. So just prepare yourself for that and expect it. Now, in dating Argentinian women, I've noticed that on average, they are less open to long-term relationships, especially in the beginning. They're much more likely to want to have their quote unquote freedom and just kind of play it by ear. Like, okay, yeah, I'm seeing this guy, but it's not serious. I'm also talking to this other guy. And then, hey, this other guy, you know, he's interesting. And, you know, I don't see him as a boyfriend, but, you know, we can have fun together. I feel like they are really playing the field in general when you're talking about younger Argentinian women. Now, this may change once they get to be 35 and up, but for women in their 20s in Argentina, less likely to want to settle down with one guy unless you're part of their social circle and you grew up with them or something like that. For foreigners, based on what I've seen, it's a lot less common than in some other countries where the girl is kind of looking for that. Now, to switch gears over to Africa, I've noticed that almost every woman that I've dated or engaged with in Africa in a dating context has been open, or at least is seeing me through the lens of, okay, this guy could possibly be a boyfriend. This guy could possibly be more, who knows, right? But I feel like 99% of them are open to that possibility. Whereas in Argentina, it seemed like maybe 10% were even entertaining that. Most were just like, okay, we're hanging out, we're having fun, but this doesn't really mean anything to me. Now, also I'll say in Africa in general, it's very easy to meet people during the daytime. It's not considered strange to just chat up a stranger and then ask for their number. Now, in Argentina, this, in my experience, is a lot less common. I've dated girls in Argentina and I've asked them that, like, hey, how about if I had met you in a coffee shop and I saw you and I said, hey, you know, blah, blah, blah. And would you like to, you know, do something? Can I get your number? Most of them told me that this would be very atypical and that most Argentinian men don't do that. Now, whether this is true or not, I don't know. Let me know down below if you're an Argentinian man and, you know, you just spitting game at girls left and right and it's working and they're with it. Hey, man, if it works for you, then awesome. I've actually done it in Argentina and I've been successful with it, but I noticed in the culture, it seems like it's much less common. I don't know if that's more so with me being a foreigner and definitely not looking like a local. But as I said, in Africa, it just feels like it's wide open. And if someone is feeling you, it doesn't matter whether you're in a coffee shop. It doesn't matter whether you're at the gym. It doesn't matter whether you're in the supermarket. You can go ahead and approach and just talk to them. Very simple, very polite, very respectful. And if they're not feeling it, they will let you know in a very respectful way. And if they are feeling it, they will show some enthusiasm and let you know that as well. And it just seems like it's almost expected in the culture versus in Argentina where, I don't know, maybe they see that as some kind of harassment or something else. So that was a very big difference that I've noticed. I've also noticed in Africa is there's less of a social circle culture. Now, I'm not saying that people don't go out in groups. Obviously they do. People do that everywhere in the world. But I'm saying you don't typically see huge groups of people out at a nightclub together, 10 people that showed up together, guys and girls in a mixed group. That happens a lot in Argentina. Doesn't happen so much in the States, here and there. But in Africa, it's not very common. All right, so the last thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is the infrastructure. If you made it this long, congratulations. Thanks for watching. And I'm going to wrap this part up here. Infrastructure in Argentina, especially in the capital, in Buenos Aires, is very, very good. You've got many bus lines that run throughout the city. They're very easy to figure out. If you use your Google Maps, it'll pop up and show you the route to get from A to B very quickly, even with transfers. All of it is by default in the Google Maps app. So getting around isn't hard. They have subways in the capital that will take you all over, multiple lines. And then if you don't want to do that, you've also got Uber, you've got, what are the other ones? They got Cabify. There's like 4 different InDriver, and then there's another one. There's like 4 different rideshare apps. So you're never going to be without transportation, easy, effortless transportation where you don't even have to speak Spanish. You could be deaf, dumb, and mute, and you're still going to be able to get where you need to go in Argentina, and especially in the capital. And this is a blessing, and it's something that I took for granted in the beginning part of the year. And then I came to Africa, and things were quite different. In Africa, you typically do not have as many options when it comes to shopping, malls, transportation, etc. Now I'm going to break it down a little bit more. So this does vary by country. In a country like Kenya, you do have a higher level of development. So they do have some very modern malls in Kenya. They do have more of the products and services that we're used to in the States. Easy to find Nike shoes and certain electronics that might be harder to find in some other African countries. And to some extent, the same is true in Namibia and Southern Africa. Much more malls, higher development, very nice roads. And the same is also true in Mauritius. But for some of the other African nations that I've mentioned, things are a little bit behind when it comes to things like that. A lot of American products, services like Amazon, you can forget about it. Getting shipping like that just overnight, all kind of products, electronic goods. You're not going to have the same kind of variety in the supermarket when it comes to certain foods that you might like, certain snacks, things like almond milk. You may or may not be able to find, and if you do find them, you're going to pay a premium for them in a lot of different African countries that aren't as developed. So I think when it comes to these things, Argentina wins because not only are you getting a very first world type infrastructure, the price is very low for what you're getting. So the value for money when it comes to infrastructure and getting certain products is very, very good. They do not have a really functioning Amazon in Argentina, but what they do have is a local version, which is called Mercado Libre. And that works really, really well for 90% of the things you want. Deliveries come rapidly, especially if you're in the capital. And these kind of things make day-to-day living a lot easier if you're going to stay in these countries and you're not just going to be a tourist. As it pertains to transportation, there are a lot of things that could be improved. Of course, this varies by country, but kind of across the board that I've seen is you've got more or less 2 models for countries. So you've got the car model, which you're going to see in the more developed countries like Namibia, like Mauritius, like Kenya. And then in other countries, you've got more of the motorcycle model, which you see in Rwanda, you see it in Uganda, you see it a little bit in some other countries as well, where most people are going to take most of their daily rides. They're going to hop on a motorcycle, pay the guy however amount of money, and they may or may not have a helmet, and that's how most people get around the cities throughout the day. Now, as it pertains to Uber and different rideshare apps, in Kenya, it works really well. They do have Uber. Uganda, it works really well. They do have Uber. In all the other countries I've been to, there is no Uber. So in Madagascar, in Mauritius, in Namibia, in Rwanda, in Burundi, forget about it. It doesn't exist. Now, some of these other countries, they do have a local version of Uber, and some, there's just nothing like it. There are no rideshare apps, like Madagascar, for example. You just have to find a taxi, call them up, and go from there. Same thing in Mauritius. There is no such thing as a rideshare app. They have a taxi mafia, and you either use a taxi, or you rent a car, or you rely on public transportation, which it's public transportation, right? And it has a lot of flaws. It comes when it wants to come. The routes are confusing, and so on and so forth. So these are things that could really be improved upon in Africa to make things a lot smoother and to increase the flow of commerce. So in Namibia, instead of having Uber, they have some other local apps that they use, and the same case in Rwanda. But these apps, they're kind of hit or miss. They don't work as well. I would say the Rwandan app is kind of on the lower end. One of them is called Lefa, Lefa. I think I'm pronouncing that right. That one works pretty well, but it can be annoying to travel to so many different countries and you have to download all these different apps, and then you go to the next country next door and then the app doesn't work. So this is another challenge. This is the last thing I'm going to say about the differences between traveling in Argentina and traveling through Africa. In Argentina, they have a black market money system. So things are a little bit complicated, and the exchange rate versus the dollar changes drastically from day to day. And also, even in the same day, there can be 3, 4, 5 different rates for the dollar. So for someone who's never been before, this can be a little bit overwhelming. But now the credit card and the debit card system is more or less updated so that things will process through a very, very good rate. So you're never really going to be cheated anymore if you're just using your international credit or debit card, as long as it's a Visa or MasterCard in Argentina. So you don't actually have to carry cash anymore, even though at times, depending on what the rate is, you can do better if you go ahead and exchange your dollars for pesos on the black market, right? Now, in Africa, every country is a little bit different, but generally there isn't a black market. I believe in Burundi there is, but generally kind of the rate, the international rate is what the rate is for Kenya, for Uganda, for Rwanda, for Madagascar, and all the other nations that I mentioned, right? So also, like I said, you don't have to really think about, if I'm using my card, am I getting the best rate? You're typically going to get a good rate if you use your card in Africa. And when it comes to paper money, things vary quite a bit, because in Africa, some places will prefer cash, and then some countries will prefer electronic money, mobile money, or what have you. So this is kind of overwhelming, because in Argentina, everyone, with very few exceptions, will prefer cash over card, right? Sometimes they'll even give you a discount if you're going to use cash versus a card. Sometimes it can be up to 10%. You know, you come in, you do your grocery shopping in a neighborhood store, they'll sometimes have a sign that'll say, if you spend over, let's say, $20, they will give you 5% or 10% cheaper if you're paying them in cash, right? In Africa, I've never seen this much of a discount for paying in cash, but for a lot of businesses, they will just simply refuse to take a card, depending on the country. And I've also seen the reverse, where certain countries, they will refuse to take cash. One of these countries that's really trying to get rid of cash is Kenya. And another one is Rwanda. They're also really trying to get everyone to use mobile money or credit cards. So because of this, it can be very annoying when you're going from one African country to the next one, because you have to think, is this a cash country or is this a card country? Is this a cash country or is this a mobile money country? So this is one more challenge when you're traveling throughout the continent versus in Argentina. I think I've covered everything. If I left something out and you guys want me to follow up on it, let me know below. I can answer your questions. If you made it this far, you're a trooper. Thanks for watching. Go ahead and like the video if you haven't already. Until next time, this is your guy, Jay Focus, reminding you to stay focused. Focus, man.